Linux is no longer just an alternative operating system for hobbyists and developers. It has evolved into a powerful, flexible, and disruptive force that is quietly reshaping the entire technology landscape, and right now big tech. Companies are paying very close attention because the rise of Linux is no longer theoretical. It is practical, visible, and increasingly unstoppable in key areas that were once completely dominated by proprietary ecosystems. And this shift is creating a kind of tension that hasn't existed at this scale before, where open-source innovation is directly challenging the control, profits, and long-term strategies of some of the largest corporations in the world. What makes Linux especially concerning to big tech is not just that it exists, but that it thrives without the traditional structures that companies rely on. There is no single owner controlling its direction, no centralized pricing model, and no dependency on one company's roadmap. Instead, Linux grows through a decentralized global community of developers, engineers, and organizations who contribute to it because it benefits everyone. And that alone breaks one of the core assumptions of the tech industry, which is that power comes from ownership and control. But Linux flips that idea completely by proving that collaboration at scale can produce software that is faster, more secure, and more adaptable than many commercial alternatives. If you look at the infrastructure of the modern internet, Linux is already everywhere, powering the majority of servers, cloud platforms, and supercomputers. And that dominance has been building quietly for years. But now it is starting to extend beyond servers into areas like personal computing, mobile devices, embedded systems, and even gaming. And this expansion is what is making big tech nervous, because once Linux begins to gain traction in consumer-facing environments, it starts to threaten revenue streams that depend on locked ecosystems and recurring software licensing models. One of the biggest advantages Linux has is its flexibility. It can be customized and optimized for almost any use case, from lightweight distributions that run on old hardware to highly specialized systems designed for enterprise workloads. And this adaptability means that companies and individuals are not forced into a one-size-fits-all solution. Instead, they can shape the operating system around their needs, and that level of control is something proprietary platforms struggle to match without sacrificing their own business models. Another factor driving the rise of Linux is the growing awareness around privacy and data ownership. Users are becoming more conscious of how their data is collected, stored, and monetized, and many are starting to question whether the convenience offered by big tech platforms is worth the trade-off. Linux, being open source, allows anyone to inspect the code, understand what it does, and verify that there are no hidden mechanisms tracking user behavior. And this transparency builds trust in a way that closed-source systems simply cannot replicate. At the same time, the developer community has become a major force behind Linux's momentum. Developers are often the first to adopt new tools and platforms, and their preferences tend to influence broader technology trends. Linux provides a powerful environment for development, with native support for programming languages, package managers, and tools that streamline workflows. And because many modern applications are built and deployed in Linux-based environments, it makes sense for developers to use Linux as their primary operating system, and as more developers choose Linux, they indirectly contribute to its growth and adoption across industries. Big tech companies are not unaware of this shift. In fact, many of them rely heavily on Linux internally, which creates an interesting paradox. They benefit from Linux's capabilities while also competing against its broader adoption. And this dual relationship means they have to carefully balance their strategies, supporting open-source initiatives while protecting their own ecosystems. But as Linux continues to improve and become more user-friendly, that balance becomes harder to maintain. The rise of cloud computing has also played a significant role in strengthening Linux's position. Most cloud platforms are built on Linux-based infrastructure, and businesses that migrate to the cloud often end up interacting with Linux environments even if they are not aware of it. This familiarity reduces the barrier to entry for adopting Linux in other areas, and over time it creates a kind of normalization where Linux is no longer seen as an alternative, but as the default. Another area where Linux is gaining ground is in the world of containers and virtualization. Technologies like containerization have revolutionized how applications are developed and deployed, and Linux is at the core of these innovations. Its architecture makes it particularly well-suited for running containers efficiently, and as companies increasingly adopt container-based workflows, they are effectively deepening their reliance on Linux, even if they continue to use other operating systems on the surface. The gaming industry is another unexpected front in this shift. For years, gaming was considered one of the weakest areas for Linux, but that perception is changing rapidly. Improvements in compatibility layers, graphics drivers, and distribution platforms have made it possible to run a wide range of games on Linux, with performance that is often comparable to other systems. And as more gamers experiment with Linux, it begins to chip away at one of the last major barriers to mainstream adoption. Hardware compatibility has also improved significantly. One of the historical challenges for Linux was limited support for certain devices. But today, many hardware manufacturers are either providing native support or ensuring compatibility through open standards. This progress removes another obstacle for users considering a switch, and it signals a broader industry recognition that Linux is not going away, but becoming more relevant over time. Education and accessibility are also playing a role in Linux's growth because it is free and open source. Linux can be used by students, schools, and organizations without the financial barriers associated with proprietary software. This accessibility allows more people to learn and experiment with technology, and it creates a new generation of users who are comfortable with Linux from the start. And as these users enter the workforce, they bring their preferences with them, further accelerating adoption. Big tech companies are particularly sensitive to changes in user behavior, and one of the most concerning trends for them is the shift toward decentralization. Linux is often associated with a broader philosophy that emphasizes user control, transparency, and independence from centralized platforms. And as this mindset spreads, it challenges the dominance of companies that rely on centralized services and ecosystems to generate revenue. Another key factor is cost. Linux can significantly reduce expenses for businesses by eliminating licensing fees and allowing greater control over infrastructure. For large organizations managing thousands of systems, these savings can be substantial, and when combined with the performance and security benefits of Linux, it becomes an increasingly attractive option. And this economic advantage puts pressure on companies that rely on software licensing as a primary source of income. Security is another area where Linux has built a strong reputation. Its open-source nature allows vulnerabilities to be identified and addressed quickly by a global community. And while no system is completely immune to threats, the transparency and collaborative approach of Linux contribute to a more resilient security model. And in an era where cyber threats are becoming more sophisticated, this resilience is a major selling point. The rise of Linux is not happening in isolation. It is part of a broader movement toward open-source software, which is gaining traction across multiple domains, from databases and development tools to artificial intelligence and machine learning. And as more critical technologies are built on open-source foundations, the influence of Linux grows alongside them, creating a kind of ecosystem effect that reinforces its position. Big tech companies are responding to this trend in various ways. Some are embracing open source by contributing to projects and releasing their own tools, while others are trying to integrate Linux into their platforms in ways that still maintain control over the user experience. But regardless of the approach, the underlying reality is that Linux is becoming too important to ignore, and its continued growth represents both an opportunity and a challenge for the industry. One of the most interesting aspects of Linux's rise is how it changes the dynamics of competition. Instead of competing against a single company, proprietary platforms are effectively competing against a global community. And that makes it much harder to predict and counter because innovation can come from anywhere, and improvements can happen at a pace that is difficult to match within traditional corporate structures. As Linux continues to evolve, it is also becoming more user-friendly. Modern distributions offer polished interfaces, intuitive installation processes, and a wide range of applications that cater to everyday needs. This usability is crucial for attracting non-technical users, and it represents a shift from Linux being a niche tool to a viable option for mainstream audiences. The role of enterprise adoption cannot be overlooked. Many large organizations are already using Linux for critical operations, and their continued investment in the platform contributes to its stability and development. Enterprise support also helps address concerns around reliability and scalability, making Linux a more attractive choice for businesses of all sizes. The open source model itself is a key part of what makes Linux so disruptive. It challenges the traditional notion that software must be proprietary to be profitable. Instead, it demonstrates that value can be created through services, support, and innovation built on top of open platforms. And this shift in thinking has implications far beyond operating systems, influencing how software is developed, distributed, and monetized. As we look at the current landscape, it becomes clear that Linux is not just competing with individual products, it is competing with entire business models. And that is why big tech is nervous, because the success of Linux suggests that there is a viable alternative to the way the industry has operated for decades, and if that alternative continues to gain traction, it could reshape the balance of power in technology. The future of Linux will likely be defined by its ability to continue evolving while staying true to its core principles, maintaining the balance between innovation and stability, and ensuring that it remains accessible to both technical and non-technical users. And if it succeeds in doing so, it will not only challenge big tech, but also redefine what users expect from the technology they rely on every day.